The wind shrieked through the wooden slats of the tiny cabin, rattling the door like an unwelcome guest. Eleanor Carter bit down on the scream rising in her throat, her fingers clawing at the rough blanket beneath her. The pain tore through her like lightning splitting a tree, raw and unforgiving. Outside, her husband, Silas, paced beneath the cold Wyoming sky, the ember of his cigarette glowing like a malevolent eye in the dark. He hadn't spoken a word to her in hours, only spat on the dirt when her cries pierced the silence. Another wave of agony struck, and Eleanor curled inward, pressing her forehead against the sweat-dampened straw mattress. She was alone, entirely alone. The midwife who had been meant to help was dead. Smallpox had seen to that. And Silas? Silas had made it clear he wanted no part in the arrival of their child. A final, shattering push, and the world split open. A frail, wailing cry filled the cabin. Eleanor's chest heaved as she reached down, hands trembling. Her fingers closed around warm, impossibly soft skin. A daughter. She barely had time to register the thought before the cabin door crashed open. The wind roared in with Silas, his boots thudding against the floorboards. He smelled of whiskey and sweat, and his face was twisted in something between disgust and fury. "It's done, then." His voice was sharp as a knife at his belt. Eleanor cradled the child closer, shielding her with her body. "A girl," she whispered. Silas stared at the squirming bundle in her arms, his jaw tightening. "A girl," he repeated, voice flat. Something inside her twisted. She had hoped, prayed, that he would soften at the sight of his child, that even a heart as hardened as his might crack, just a little. Instead, his lip curled. "I needed a son," he muttered. "I needed an heir, someone to help with the land." Eleanor swallowed against the rising lump in her throat. "She's still your daughter." Silas scoffed, rubbing his hand over his face. "A daughter's a burden, Ellie." His voice dropped lower. "And I got no use for burdens." Fear, sharp and cold, coiled around her ribs. "I'll be stronger," she said. "I'll work harder. We'll manage." Silas didn't respond. He turned away, staring at the cracked walls of the cabin as if searching for an answer in the warped wood. Eleanor held her baby closer. The child, still slick with birth, had quieted, her tiny body pressed against her mother's heartbeat. Silas exhaled sharply, then turned back, eyes dark. "Get up." Eleanor hesitated. I just gave birth." "I said get up." She flinched at the edge in his voice, but forced herself to sit. Her body protested, weak and trembling. Silas moved the wooden chest near the door and threw it open. Rough hands snatched up a blanket, a few of her belongings. He tossed them at her feet. "You're leaving." Her breath caught. "What?" "You heard me." He grabbed her arm, dragging her forward. "I don't need you. I don't need her." Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. "You can't." He yanked her toward the door. "She's your child, Silas," she gasped. "I didn't ask for her." His grip tightened, steel in his fingers. "And I sure as hell didn't ask for a useless wife." Then she was outside. The wind cut through her thin nightgown, biting into her skin like fangs. The world was black and endless, the stars distant and indifferent. Silas shoved a bundle of cloth after her, and the door slammed shut. Silence. Eleanor stood frozen, barefoot in the dirt, the weight of her newborn pressing against her chest. The child stirred, making a tiny whimpering sound. The wind howled. A sob wrenched from Eleanor's throat. She stumbled forward, knees buckling, but she caught herself before she fell. She couldn't fall. She couldn't let the cold claim them. She turned, pounding on the door. "Silas, please." No answer. Another sob, raw and desperate. She pressed her forehead against the wood, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Then a faint glow flickered through the cracks. He was lighting the lamp. He wasn't coming back. She was alone. Panic clawed at her ribs. Her mind raced. She couldn't stay here. The night would kill them. The nearest town was miles away, an impossible distance on foot. She turned her eyes to the darkened prairie, the land stretching endlessly in every direction. No one was coming to save her. She had to move. For hope, drawing the blanket around her child. Eleanor forced herself forward. Every step sent fire through her body, her limbs weak, unsteady. The world blurred. She walked, and walked, and walked. Her breath came in short gasps, her legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion and agony. The air was thick with the scent of pine and frozen earth. Then came the wolves. A long, echoing howl rose into the night. Another answered. Fear gripped her, sharp as a knife. She quickened her pace, her arms tightening around the baby. A rustling in the brush. Her heart pounded. She turned sharply, searching the darkness. A shadow moved among the trees. She stumbled, nearly falling. Her legs burned, her body screaming for rest. The wolves would come. The cold would take her. Was this where it ended? Another step, another breath. Her strength was fading. The night pressed in, heavy and merciless. The trees whispered, the wind carrying secrets through their twisted branches. Then a sound, a crunch of snow, not an animal. Footsteps. Eleanor's breath caught. She turned, pulse hammering. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in furs. A man, her body locked in terror. Settlers told stories of the dangers lurking beyond their homesteads, of warriors who slit throats in the night. The man studied her in silence, dark eyes unreadable beneath the shadows of his hood. He took a slow step forward. Eleanor's grip tightened on hope. Please. He raised a hand, palm outward, a gesture of peace. His voice, when it came, was deep, steady. You'll die out here. Her breath hitched. She could barely stand. She had no choice. As the night closed in, Eleanor took the stranger's outstretched hand. The first thing Eleanor noticed was the warmth. It wrapped around her like a cocoon, in stark contrast to the frigid wilderness she had last known. Her eyelids fluttered, and she forced herself to wake, though her body felt heavy, sluggish. The scent of burning sage filled her nose, earthy, unfamiliar. She wasn't dead, blinking against the dim firelight. She found herself in a space unlike any she had ever seen. The walls were not of wood, but stretched hide, golden brown and swaying gently with the breeze. A fire crackled at the center of the room, sending shifting shadows across the curved ceiling. Panic clawed at her throat. Hope. She sat up too fast, a sharp ache spreading through her abdomen, but she ignored it, searching. Then relief. Beside her, wrapped in soft fur, her daughter slept, her tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. A rustling sound drew her gaze. Across the room, the man from the forest knelt by the fire, feeding it with careful hands. He had shed the heavy furs he had worn when he found her, and now she could see him clearly. His long, dark hair fell past his shoulders, bound loosely by a leather cord. His face was strong, angular, but not unkind. The firelight accentuated the sharp lines of his jaw, the quiet intensity of his gaze as he finally looked up. You are awake. His voice was deep, steady, as it had been before. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the blanket draped over her legs. Where am I? In my village. Her pulse quickened. She had heard whispers in the settler town, stories of Sioux warriors. Some painted them as savages, others as ghosts of the land itself. She had never known what to believe, but none of those stories had prepared her for this. She swallowed, glancing at her sleeping child. Why did you help me? The man regarded her for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable. You were dying. It was not an answer, not really, but she did not press. A new voice interrupted the quiet. She is lucky you found her, Chayton. Eleanor turned sharply. A woman had entered the tent, tall, with thick braids and a knowing expression. Her clothing was similar to Chayton's, a tunic and leggings adorned with intricate beadwork. In her hands, she carried a wooden bowl. Chayton stood as she approached. Winona, my sister. Winona knelt beside Eleanor, extending the bowl. Drink. It will help you regain your strength. Eleanor hesitated, but the woman's face held no malice, only patience. She reached for the bowl, her hands unsteady. The liquid inside smelled of herbs and something faintly sweet. The moment it touched her lips, warmth bloomed in her chest. Thank you, she murmured. Winona inclined her head. You are welcome. Chayton watched silently as Eleanor finished the drink. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something measuring, calculating. Eleanor shifted. What happens now? When Nona's gaze flicked to Chayton, he answered without hesitation. You heal, then you decide. She did not know what he meant, but exhaustion pulled at her before she could question further. The days passed in a haze of rest and quiet observation. The people in the village moved with an ease she had never seen among settlers. They laughed, worked, lived in a way that felt balanced. She saw men returning with fresh kills, their bows slung across their backs. She watched women weave intricate patterns into cloth, their voices low and melodic. She was an outsider here. Some of them regarded her with open curiosity, others with thinly veiled suspicion. A few simply ignored her. She understood why. She had been raised among people who viewed the Sioux as enemies, as something to be feared or conquered. And yet, here she was alive because of them. Hope, it seemed, had no such reservations. The women of the village adored her, passing her from arm to arm with gentle hands, murmuring words Eleanor did not understand. The baby cooed, unbothered by the foreign cadence of their voices. When Nona had taken to explaining things to her, small things at first, the way the hides were stretched, the meaning of certain patterns, she was patient, but there was always a careful watchfulness beneath her words. It was Chayton, however, who truly tested her. You cannot expect to survive by relying on others, he told her one morning, tossing a bundle of cloth into her lap. She frowned. What is this? Clothing. Yours is not suited for here. It was practical, made from soft leather and fur lined against the cold. She hesitated, running her fingers over the beaded seams. I don't belong here. Chayton met her gaze, unflinching. That is your choice. She wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she changed. Over the next weeks, she learned. When Nona taught her how to weave thread, how to prepare food over an open flame. But it was Chayton who taught her the things that meant survival. He showed her how to hold a bow, adjusting her stance when she faltered, how to listen to the forest, to recognize the shift in the wind that warned of a storm before the sky darkened. She struggled at first. Her fingers fumbled over the bowstring. Her legs ached from crouching too long. But she did not stop. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky, she hit her first target. A small rabbit, nothing more. But when she lifted it in her hands, something inside her shifted. Chayton nodded in approval. You learn fast. For the first time in a long while, she felt something close to pride. But there were still those who doubted her. You should not have brought her here, Tokala, the village elder, told Chayton one evening as they sat by the fire. Eleanor pretended not to hear, focusing on hope as she nestled against her chest. She was abandoned, Chayton said simply. She is a settler, Tokala countered. And where settlers go, trouble follows. Silence stretched between them. Eleanor met Tokala's gaze across the fire. I am not like them. The old man studied her for a long moment before shaking his head. We shall see. But it was Chayton's words that lingered in her mind long after the fire had burned low. You must decide what you are, Eleanor. Not for us. For yourself. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his words pressing into her bones. She had spent her life belonging to someone else, to her father, then to Silas. Even here, she was something to be questioned, debated, but for the first time, she had a choice. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. And in the dark, as her daughter slept peacefully in her arms, Eleanor Carter made a silent vow. She would not be cast aside again. The first sign of trouble came with the wind. It carried the scent of burning wood and churned the air with an eerie stillness that made the village uneasy. Eleanor felt it deep in her chest, a sensation of something shifting, something coming. She had lived among the Sioux long enough to recognize the way the people moved when danger whispered through the trees. The hunters returned early. Women gathered children closer. Warriors tightened the straps of their weapons. She stood outside Chayton's lodge, hope nestled against her chest in a woven sling. The baby fussed restless, as if sensing her mother's unease. Eleanor hushed her, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. The warmth of the child anchored her, but dread curled around her ribs like a tightening rope. Then came the riders. A cloud of dust rose on the horizon, cutting through the golden prairie. 5 men on horseback, moving fast, moving with purpose. Her breath hitched. Silas. She knew his shape, the cruel set of his shoulders, the way he leaned slightly forward in the saddle like he was always ready for a fight. The men flanking him, grimy, rough-looking settlers she didn't recognize, rode with the same posture, their hands resting too easily on their guns. Eleanor took a step back. Chayton appeared at her side. His expression was unreadable, but his presence steadied her. He carried his bow, his quiver full, though his hand had not yet reached for an arrow. The village stirred behind them. Warriors positioned themselves at the edges, silent and still as the trees. The riders slowed, their horses snorting as they neared. Silas pulled his mount to a sharp stop, dust swirling at his boots. His eyes, cold and pale, settled on Eleanor. "There you are." His voice sent ice through her veins. Chayton did not move, but Eleanor felt the shift in him, the way his muscles tensed beside her. Silas swung down from his saddle. "Took some searching to find you," he continued, voice slick with mockery. "Imagine my surprise when I heard you were holed up here with savages." Eleanor's grip on hope tightened. The baby stirred but did not cry. "You have no place here," Chayton said, his voice level but firm. Silas sneered. "That's so." His gaze flickered over Chayton before moving back to Eleanor. "You're coming with me." "No." It was the first word she had spoken, and it rang out sharper than she intended. Silas stilled. "No," he repeated. His lips curled. "You don't get to say no, Ellie." Eleanor straightened, lifting her chin. "I do now." Silas exhaled a short laugh, shaking his head as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. "I must have knocked something loose in that little head of yours." His eyes darkened. "You belong to me?" The word sent a familiar terror crawling up her spine. "I never belonged to you," she said. Silas' nostrils flared. "I should have let you die out there." "But you didn't," she said, "and I survived without you." Silas took a step forward, but Chayton shifted, blocking his path. The movement was subtle, but it was enough. Silas' jaw tightened. "She ain't yours," Silas growled. Chayton's expression remained calm. "She is not yours either." The words, spoken so simply, so surely, made something in Eleanor's chest burn. Silas' hand twitched toward his holster. A whisper of movement. Before he could blink, an arrow was nocked, the tip aimed at his heart. Chayton's hand was steady. His eyes held no hesitation, no fear. Silas' men tensed, shifting in their saddles, but the village warriors stepped forward in unison, bows raised, spears gleaming in the sunlight. For the first time, doubt flickered across Silas' face. "You think you can keep her?" His voice was quieter now, edged with something bitter. "You think she's one of you?" Eleanor stepped forward before Chayton could answer. "I don't care what you think I am," she said. "I am not yours." Silas' gaze burned into her, filled with something ugly. "You will regret this," he muttered. Chayton did not lower his bow. "Leave." Silas hesitated, fury warring with caution. Then, with a sharp jerk of his arm, he turned back to his horse. His men followed suit, their eyes lingering, searching for an opening that wasn't there. Eleanor did not breathe until they disappeared over the horizon. The village slowly returned to life, the tension easing, but Chayton did not move from his place beside her. The bowstring remained taut for another long second before he finally lowered it. Eleanor turned to him. "Thank you." Chayton studied her for a moment before shaking his head. This is not over. She knew he was right. Silas would return. The first snowfall came early. The wind carried whispers of winter through the village, sending white flakes swirling against the darkened sky. Eleanor pulled Hope closer, feeling the warmth of her daughter's small body against her own. The child had grown stronger, her cheeks round with health, her eyes wide with wonder as she reached tiny fingers toward the falling snow. Eleanor marveled at how much had changed, how much she had changed. She had learned to hunt, to track, to stitch wounds and prepare food for the long months ahead. She had learned to listen, to the wind, to the wisdom of the elders, to the steady beat of her own heart. No longer a stranger, she had woven herself into the fabric of the village, thread by thread. But beneath it all, a shadow remained. Silas would return. She felt it like an ache in her bones, a quiet certainty. He was not a man to let things go, and his pride had been wounded. That made him dangerous. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Chayton sat beside her, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His presence had become a comfort, steady and unwavering. "You are thinking of him," he said without looking up. Eleanor did not deny it. "He won't stop." Chayton nodded, setting the knife aside. "Then we will be ready." She turned to him, searching his face. "Why did you save me that night?" For a long moment, he was silent. Then his dark eyes met hers. "Because I saw someone who had not yet been given a chance to fight." Eleanor swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. She had spent her life surviving. But here, among these people, she had learned what it meant to live. And she would not let Silas take that from her. The attack came at dusk. The horses' hooves thundered against the frozen ground, their breath rising in white clouds as they charged. The village erupted into motion, women gathering the children, warriors grabbing weapons. But they had been ready. They had known. Eleanor stood beside Chayton, bow in hand. Fear pulsed through her, sharp and electric, but she forced herself to breathe. Silas led the charge, his face twisted with fury. "Burn it down!" he bellowed, raising his rifle. A shot rang out. Chayton moved before Eleanor could react, an arrow flying from his bow with deadly precision. It struck one of the riders in the shoulder, knocking him from his saddle. The village warriors let loose their own arrows, cutting through the enemy ranks. But Silas pushed forward, his gun raised, aimed directly at Eleanor. She did not freeze. She did not run. She lifted her own bow and fired. The arrow struck true, slicing across his arm, making him jerk back with a snarl of pain. His horse reared, and he barely kept his seat. His men faltered, realizing they were outmatched, that they had stepped into a fight they could not win. "Fall back!" one of them shouted. Silas hesitated, his gaze locking onto Eleanor's. She did not look away. For the first time, he saw her not as something weak to control, but as something greater, and that terrified him. He yanked his horse around and fled. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun. The village stood unharmed, its people victorious. Eleanor exhaled, her hands trembling. Chayton touched her arm. "It is done." She nodded, but deep inside, she knew the greatest battle had not been fought with weapons. It had been fought within her. She had won. As the sun set over the horizon, Eleanor looked at her daughter, at the village that had become her home. A new beginning. And this time, she was ready for it.